Ali Velshi on MSNBC recently spoke with Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg. Let us have a gander at what those two talked about. By the way, Ali Velshi, all credit where it's due. The man is in Ukraine right now. He is a hell of a guy for that.
If you're outside for more than 15, 20 minutes, you start feeling the congestion, heaviness in your chest.
And I smelled it, that chemical odor that's in the water. So, of course, my heart sank. I'm freaking out. I start to shake.
They're not sure whether to believe everyone or not. And they're concerned for their kids. They're afraid to drink the water. They're concerned for bathing their babies.
I don't want to live in that fear of wondering, are we going to get sick or are we not?
I mean, the damage is already done. We're going to see the repercussions of this for the next 10, 20, 30 years.
Residents in East Palestine, Ohio, are still confused and fearful 2 weeks since a train derailment dumped toxic chemicals into their town, upending their lives. Today, the EPA Administrator, Michael Regan, visited the town for a second time in a week, drinking the water in an attempt to demonstrate that it's safe. But after conflicting information from official sources and with oil sheens coating local streams and the wreck still looming, residents remain wary. In an effort to...
Let's look back here. Yeah, that looks real safe. That looks real safe, sure. I want to just point out, because I don't think they mention it in this story, the people who did the testing to find out if the water was safe, can you guess who they do consulting with? Norfolk Southern, the very company responsible for the catastrophe in the first place. Why on earth would you allow them to be the company that does the testing? Those are the people that said, that, perfectly safe. Go ahead and drink it. Ridiculous.
And with oil sheens coating local streams and the wreck still looming, residents remain wary. In an effort to prevent similar disasters from occurring, today, Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg announced a series of rail reforms. Joining us now is the U.S. Transportation Secretary, Pete Buttigieg. Secretary, thank you for being with us. I want to ask you, the residents of East Palestine are asking when you are going to pay them a visit. What have you got to say to them?
So I am planning to visit. I have followed the norm in the first days of the crash response of staying out of the way of the independent NTSB. The National Transportation Safety Board has the lead on the investigative part. But we're now entering the phase where this is becoming a policy conversation. So in addition to being ready to take enforcement action against Norfolk Southern to the extent that the investigation turns up any violations, it is also time for us to move forward from a policy perspective. Make sure that we strengthen accountability and strengthen rules on rail safety. Today, I've been calling for 3 sets of actions, actions that the rail industry needs to change, actions that Congress can help us with, and things we're doing right now to take action in the U.S. Department of Transportation. Both.
Let me just be clear. He caught a lot of heat, as did Joe Biden, for that matter, for not coming out against these companies earlier, for not saying that regulations were new regulations must be considered earlier. This is only after public pressure. Just get a sense of how useful public pressure can be. Yes, indeed. It looks like he is going to be proposing new regulations and implementing, let's hope, new regulations. What I'm really hoping we don't hear is that he is going to, quote unquote, work with the companies to decide how they ought to be regulated. It's kind of like asking the bank robber how many security cameras should there be in the bank.
Things we've been working on all along that we're accelerating, and new things we're adding to the agenda based on some of the lessons we've already learned from what we saw in East Palestine. You listen to the residents talking about what they've been through. They are concerned, they are frightened, and so is anybody who lives near a rail line, which is true for so many communities, wondering if they too can be kept safe. That is a very important thing to safeguard, and in a town, Washington, D.C., where the freight rail industry has flexed a lot of muscle and wielded a lot of power. Now is a chance to make sure that the future is different from the past in terms of their ability to get their way.
Let's talk about the immediate concern here, and that is the health concerns that people have, what they think is conflicting information. As you just saw, some people say they smell things, they see oil sheens. They're worried in a very immediate fashion about health. Where is your department with respect to the EPA and Norfolk Southern and local officials in dealing with people who are worried that they are drinking or breathing contaminated water or air?
Well, I'm in frequent contact with the administrator of the EPA. They, of course, have the lead on the environmental side, and they're doing excellent work to make sure these residents have access to the best testing, the best information, the best science. There's also now federal public health presence on the ground through CDC and Health and Human Services. And so even though our piece of this obviously is the transportation side, I am very concerned to make sure that these residents are getting what they need on the health and environmental side, and really appreciate the work that's been done by local first responders and by our administration in order to make sure they have everything they need. And that's going to continue, long after there's less public attention, less people coming through town, and less media coverage, frankly. There still needs to be support for these residents because their concerns are going to continue for years.
Okay, so my issue is that so far I haven't heard specifics. And what concerns me is that these are the companies, these train companies, these massive, massive, massive companies that were allowed to run around willy-nilly, carrying substances that, when lit on fire, caused a community to be evacuated. If you are carrying, and that apparently wasn't a toxic substance. If you are carrying a substance that, should it catch fire, would cause a town to have to flee, that's a toxic substance. It's not. That doesn't seem like a terribly difficult thing to figure out. Just weeks prior to this crash, there was a threatened worker strike about the very issue of running skeleton staffs on trains. Workers for this company said that what they were concerned about was how dangerous it is to try to operate one of these massive trains with a skeleton crew, with an overworked staff. It's just dangerous. Now we have the unfortunate payoff of the administration siding against the workers. They quashed their striking efforts. And this is what we get. So what I'd like to hear by the end of this interview, Pete Buttigieg say, is that they are going to be re-examining those workers' demands because the workers appear to have been correct.
As we were researching this, I learned that there were something like 1,049 trail derailments in the United States last year, and I immediately thought that must mean individual rail cars, not actual trains. And no, it turns out that's actual trains. What is it that we need to do to keep trains on the rails? And more importantly, there's some reporting that Norfolk Southern wasn't compelled to tell everybody about this because there wasn't enough hazardous material on the trains. I would think that any amount of hazardous material would be subject to strict regulation.
That's right. This train was subject to some hazardous material requirements and rules, but was not part of the most restricted category. And I think a lot of people are wondering if there's a category called high hazard flammable train, why wouldn't a train like this qualify? That's one of the things that we are looking at the maximum authorities we have. Although I got to say, our authorities really have been constrained over the years by Congress, which is why we're doing two things at once. We're making the most of the authorities we have and calling on Congress to give us a stronger hand here. And I'll give you a couple examples of that. There was a push by my department under a couple couple administrations ago to get more fortified tank cars out on the rails. That was supposed to be done by 2025. Congress, I think responding to industry lobbying, pushed that out to 2029. I think that date needs to be brought back up. Also, there's the issue of how tough the fines are. So even when
Let's not let that skate by. Let's get his exact words.
Push that out to 2029. I think that date needs to be brought administrations ago to get more fortified tank cars out on the rails. That was supposed to be done by 2025. Congress, I think responding to industry lobbying.
Industry lobbying. As in, these companies spend millions of dollars buying off politicians. That is what lobbying comes down to. Millions of dollars buying off politicians. In exchange, they get billions of dollars in profit. And that right there, that's what we get in exchange. So, millions of dollars of bribes. The can gets kicked further down the road, and knowing, with these thousands of derailments a year, knowing that something like this will happen, the American people, once again, are stuck with the consequences. Ridiculous. I also have not yet truly heard a specific from Pete Buttigieg about what he's going to do. This is passing it down to Congress. What is he going to do with his, as he says, existing powers? Let's find out.
Push that out to 2029. I think that date needs to be brought back up. Also, there's the issue of how tough the fines are. So even when we catch a railroad company in an egregious violation that leads to a loss of life, the most that we can assess per violation is about $250,000. And for a multi-billion-dollar company like Norfolk Southern or the other major freight railroads, I just don't think that's enough to have the deterrent effect that these fines need to have. So those are some of the things Congress can help with. One of the things we're working on as a department is a rule that the previous administration froze, but that we restarted when we got here, to set minimum standards for crew on board these trains. You know, these.
There we go. There we go. If you saw our interview, the first part that we've released so far, with the folks from the True North Eager Beaver podcast. And by the way, if you're not a fan, I recommend giving them a shot. They're really good. Pete Buttigieg is among the best politicians in the U.S., in the game right now. By Mr. Grizzly, a.k.a. Paul's estimation. Not best necessarily as in most beneficial to have around. Best as in skilled at the game of politics. And he spent a lot of time passing the buck. And he said a lot of things I'm sure he would know that a person like me agrees with. Yeah, those fines, for example, are silly. $250,000 to one of these companies? I would not be surprised to find out they make that in profit at a minimum for every one of their trips that they take. It wouldn't surprise me. That is such a laughably small amount of money. But now he gets into what he's actually going to do, and it is exactly what I hope to hear, insisting that there is more staff, as was requested by the workers before this crash happened, as was requested by the workers. Good. It's a shame Palestine, Ohio, had to be evacuated. It's a shame that right now there's thousands and thousands of dead fish floating in their river, that there are dead pets, and that there are people that may have health consequences from this, that don't know whether or not it's safe to go home. They don't know. It's a shame that had to happen before they decided to get on board with what the workers were telling them the whole time.
Railroads have cut and cut and cut when it comes to the workforce. Fewer safety positions, fewer maintenance positions. And now they have actually been pushing to be allowed to have just one person on a train, even a train that could be a mile long or longer. So we're developing the rules that would require there to be at least two. We're going through that legal process right now, but it's just one example of the things that we are doing with the powers that we have, even while we're calling on Congress to help us get a stronger hand.
So in other words, he is finally getting to work on doing some regulations. Bear in mind, this was a McKinley guy. He was a former consultant for just a massive consulting. I don't know. He was a former employee for a massive consulting firm. He worked with some giant organizations in the U.S. and Canada, and he's from that social group where they convince each other that the way to do the answer for every problem, no matter what the problem is give more money to big business, put less rules on big business. And it doesn't surprise me that this guy, Pothole Pete, who couldn't apparently fix the potholes in his own town he was mayor of, that this guy is erring on the side of corporations, waiting for disasters to happen before he would dare consider regulating them. But credit where it's due, he is now finally, sounds like, getting to work on it.
I have to ask you, I'm here in Kyiv, Ukraine, and one of the things the mayor of East Palestine said that he called on President Biden to visit East Palestine before he went to Ukraine. He said that was the biggest slap in the face that tells you right now he doesn't care about us, talking about President Biden. So he can send every agency he wants to, but I found out this morning that, and one of the briefings that he was in the Ukraine giving millions of dollars away to people over there, not to us, and I'm furious.
I just spent some time dunking on Biden over this issue, the Norfolk Southern crash. Let me go the other way as well. How far in advance do you think he had to plan that trip to Ukraine? What would his physical presence have done in Ohio? And what did his physical presence in Ukraine do? I appreciate that mayor's whole world is his town, and it should be. But come on, be reasonable. That's ridiculous. If you want to be angry at somebody, it's a wild idea. Try being angry at Mike DeWine, governor of Ohio. He could have immediately requested federal aid. He chose to instead rag on Biden and Buttigieg without having requested that aid, accusing them of doing nothing when he hadn't requested anything be done. That is not how the federal government works. They must be asked to step in by the state leaders. So I gotta disagree with the mayor of Palestine on that one.
Look, to Americans who have a train derailment, particularly with hazardous chemicals in their community, you can see why this feels like the biggest priority for them and perhaps 2 generations to follow if there's hazardous chemicals out there. What do you say to people who see the president's visit to Ukraine but don't see you or the president in East Palestine?
Well, the biggest thing I want residents of East Palestine to know is that they're not alone. Our department's personnel were on the ground from within the first hours of the incident. They've got multiple federal agencies on the ground, partnering with the state, partnering with local first responders. And this has the attention of the entire administration and will for many years to come. Look, the people of East Palestine deserve accountability from Norfolk Southern. That's something that the EPA announced today, the level that they're holding Norfolk Southern to. It's something that we're going to pursue to the maximum extent allowed by law. And I'll tell you, I am planning to go, and when I'm on the ground, it's going to be about action. It's not going to be about show or politics, because I can very much relate to how a mayor feels, having been mayor, and noticed that when we had disasters in our community, there were 2 kinds of people who showed up. People who were there because they had a specific role to play, job to do, and difference to make and wanted to help, and people who were there because they wanted to look good. This administration has been on the ground from day one, and that support for East Palestine will not go away.
Okay, just to be clear, it will be about politics. It won't be about action, but I'm not blaming him. When he physically shows up, I want to stress this. Physically being there, usually, unless it's something like, for example, Biden in Kiev, it usually doesn't actually accomplish anything other than the person in charge acknowledging that something has happened. But that is not useless. I get that he's got to play politics a little bit here. He's got to say, oh, we're going to get stuff done, because he knows he has failed to do that. But yeah, no, when he makes a trip there, of course it's going to be politics. But it's good politics, and I don't think he should pretend like it's anything else when he is doing that trip. But don't let him get away with making that trip and saying, I did something, because there is a difference, and you need actual regulations in place fast. These trains are still out there after the East Palestine crash. Well, guess what? In the state of Michigan, Norfolk Southern, another train crashed. Thank God it didn't carry PVC piping or the material to make it. And if it had been carrying that, thank God it didn't catch on fire. Or your old pal Jake would be doing this from his cell phone in a even more stained suit a couple miles down the road.
What are you able to do to get clarity to the people on the ground in East Palestine about whether they can drink their water and what they have to do? Because one of the sources of tension has been conflicting information.
Well, I think the most important thing is to make sure that they have access to good science, good testing, and good data. And that's part of what my colleague, Administrator Michael Regan, who I know cares deeply about this and is on the ground or has been today, one of the things he's focused on. People need to be able to get access to that testing. The municipal water has been tested, and as I understand it, found safe. Many people want to know if there.
One thing I want us to listen for is if he says that there is going to be a rule now that a company that measures the effect of another company's crash cannot have an existing business relationship with them. That is a conflict of interest. That needs to be regulation number one. That needs to be a federal regulation. That needs to be something the EPA puts in place immediately. And I'm not aware of any rule that prevents them from doing that. Could be wrong. I tried to find one, couldn't find one. It's hard to find the absence of something. But yeah, that's what I want to hear him say.
Wells are also safe and have been given access to testing as well. Look, this is one of the most basic things that all of us need to know that we're safe, is that the water we're drinking is safe. And so it's a very, very understandable concern by residents. The best thing that anyone can do to offer them clarity is to get them access to good tests to scientifically confirm the quality of their water.
Get them access to good tests. Great. I'm gonna just let that play out. Yeah, that doesn't sound like much to me. I remember I have a phobia of the word access because it is so commonly used when talking about healthcare. People will say, we want to make sure all Americans have access to health care. Cut to everybody standing up and applauding. Remember that I have access to the Ferrari dealership. I can walk in and give them $50,000 as a down payment for a ridiculous sports car and then get a sports car. Can I actually do that? Will I do that tomorrow? No. Because you need the money. So having access to those tests means nothing. Now, maybe he didn't mean it like that. But the fact that I don't know how he meant it, the fact that I can't tell you exactly what he was saying there, means he didn't really say anything. That's a problem. It sounds like what they're doing is not enough. It sounds like we should be pushing for specific regulations, such as barring any company that works with that has a conflict of interest, let's just say, barring any such company from being the company that does this testing. I think that's reasonable. What can you do? Well, you can contact Secretary Buttigieg. Tell him that. He works for you. He's a big, important guy, and the cool thing about our government is that doesn't change the fact that he is your employee. Appointed, yes. But he still works for you. Tell him. Tell him that is not sufficient. Not sufficient to say we are going to do some things. We are going to have a talk, begin negotiations. No. Make hard and fast rules. Don't consult with the train companies about what rules, about what restraints will be put on them. We can already assume what they say. They don't like any of them. They have demonstrated, these train companies, that when left to their own devices, they crash thousands of trains a year, and sometimes those crashes cause towns to be evacuated. Tell Buttigieg what you want done. Contact link is in the description.